Hi everyone, welcome back to my garden. So it's been about a month since I've been in the garden because I was away for a work trip. So the garden is definitely looking a little neglected, but there is still a lot to harvest. So let's do a quick garden tour. So I'm gonna start with the good. So let's start over here with my onion bed. As you can see here, this bed was full of onions. We planted this in the spring, and you can tell that they're ready to harvest because all of the onion tops have started to fall over, which means it's the perfect time to harvest. This bed was filled with onions, shallots, and leeks. I pulled the leeks last week because they were ready. So today I'm gonna pull all of the onions and all of the shallots that are left over. These are some of the biggest onions that I have ever grown. Take a look at this. Look at that. It is the most beautiful little onion bulb. I'm very excited about this. And this bed is absolutely filled with onions that are this big. Then if we come over here, I already pulled this one, but I just wanted to show you these beautiful shallots. I have never seen shallots this big at the grocery store, so I'm very excited about this. These are absolutely beautiful. So I'm going to pull all of these today and cure them, and I'm going to do a video on how to cure your onions and shallots. So if you are curious about how to do that, stay tuned. I grew a few different varieties of onions this year, and they are all storage onions, so I'm going to cure them right away, and then they will store in my basement until I go through them. So I'm hoping, I don't think this is quite a year's worth of onion because we do go through so many onions in our house, but I'm hoping that this gets us through at least till Christmas. I also planted a variety of red onion here. Can't remember what this one's called, but I have a few of these. I'm not sure if these ones are also storage onions, the red ones, but we go through quite a bit of red onions, especially in the summertime. So I think that we'll be able to get through these before they go bad. And then I just wanted to show you this lovely nasturtium. Look how beautiful this is. Starting to trail down. The leaves look beautiful. The flowers are this beautiful neon orange. Just a very beautiful nasturtium. This bed looked amazing when all the onions were still alive. Because I was gone for so long, the weeds have definitely taken over my garden, and that is especially true for these tomato beds. I've spent the last couple days pulling weeds, but also trellising them. If you can tell here, these tomatoes look quite small. They don't look as tall as they should for being, I don't know, almost 2 months old, maybe even 3 at this point. And that's because I hadn't trellised them in a month. So they started to tip over and crawl on the ground, which is what tomatoes do if you don't actually trellis them up. So I spent the last couple days getting them off the ground, and as a result, some of the branches ended up snapping because some of them do have fruit on them, and they were kind of used to growing on the ground, and then when I tried to straighten them up to trellis them, they snapped. So unfortunately, I did lose some fruits in the process. But overall, I got most of them trellised up, and they're starting to look really good. I will flip the camera around and show you all the different varieties that I have growing. So these ones here are Amish paste, and there are quite a few tomatoes that are green right now, so they're definitely starting to set fruit. But yeah, unfortunately, especially with this variety, because they are such big fruit, when I tried to trellis them, a lot of them did break off, so I did lose quite a bit, but there's still lots of flowers on them, as you can see there. Lots of flowers, lots of fruit to turn red still, so I'm not too concerned. Then if I move down here, there are some cherry tomatoes that need to be picked today for sure. So I will pick these. I think these ones here are sweeties, the ones that kind of grow on the vine like that. And then I have some sun golds down here. All of these need to be picked today. And then this part of the tomato bed does not look super great. I'm not sure if it's because the soil maybe dries out a little bit faster, or if it's maybe a little bit more compact, but the plants overall are a lot smaller, and yeah, they just aren't as big and lush as the ones over there. It could be a variety thing. This is a different variety. These are all I think these are all Black Beauties, so you can see the tops of those ones there, and then these ones are starting to look really good. But yeah, definitely gonna have to amend the soil a little bit and add some more organic matter to hopefully kind of combat the compacted soil that I'm dealing with. So on this side, we have some Roma tomatoes. These plants are, I don't know if this variety is maybe a determinate type of tomato because they're very compact, but they still have quite a bit of fruit on them, but they're so much smaller than the other tomatoes. So I'm not quite sure what's going on here, but I did unfortunately snap an entire branch of Roma tomatoes off when I was trellising. So that was very sad, but these are still looking pretty good. And then just some more tomatoes. This bed has about 30 tomatoes in total. And you can see some of the casualties here. But overall, these tomatoes look pretty good. These ones here were some of the ones that were on the ground and I couldn't quite get the plant to trellis up. You can see actually that the vine is split there. So I'm not sure how well these ones are gonna do, but there's some more fruit up here and some more fruit there. So hopefully these all start to ripen soon. Overall, they're not looking too bad. I'm pretty happy with how this looks considering it has not been taken care of for a month. So behind me here is one of the failures of the year. So this is a bed that originally had all my brassicas in it, and it was doing pretty well until I left and the weeds completely took over. So in the last month, the weeds have completely overgrown this bed. You can still see that there are a few brassicas that are still doing pretty okay. Some of them are flowering. And then there's a kale down there that's not looking too bad, but everything's pretty stunted because it's being shadowed out by all the weeds and outgrown and probably outcompeting for, or the weeds are outcompeting the brassicas for nutrients as well. So my plan for this bed is to just cut all the weeds back, and then I think I'm gonna till this bed and this bed because they're just so incredibly weedy. I'm not quite sure what I'm gonna do with these beds yet because there are so many weeds growing in them and a lot of them have gone to seed. I know I'm gonna have a huge weed issue in these two beds in particular next year. So I'm debating what I wanna do. I definitely need to pull all the weeds or pull as many of them as I can, especially the ones that are currently seeding right now. And then I'm debating whether I just wanna till everything. These beds in particular were very compacted and it made it really hard to plant anything into these beds. So I'm thinking I might want to till. I try really hard to be like no-till. I really believe in not tilling your soil, but these beds are so compacted and I need to work in some organic material some way. So I think I'm gonna have to till them, but I haven't decided yet, but we'll see. But this bed behind me here, which is a weedy mess right now, originally had a bunch of herbs here. So there's actually lavender growing, or there was. Actually, I haven't checked to see if the lavender's still alive. But I had a few lavender plants at the very front. And then there is some celery growing, and it's actually growing pretty good. So considering this is being completely outcompeted with weeds, there is celery growing there and it doesn't look too bad. I've never grown celery before, so I'm not exactly sure what it's supposed to look like, but oh, there's a rabbit that just went by, but it's not looking too bad. And then if I continue down this way, lots of weeds. And then I have some indigo growing here. So this is all indigo that I planned to use for dyes. I weeded this area the other day just to give them a little bit more sunlight, and my plan is to kind of weed the rest of this as well. And then at the end here, I have some glass corn, which considering once again it is being outcompeted with weeds, it's looking pretty good. So I'm hoping that I'll get some ears of corn. I don't think anything's really growing on here. Yeah, it still looks quite small, so we'll see. And then this bed here is just on the other side of the garden to the other tomato bed is another bed full of tomatoes. So this one also has about 30 tomato plants planted. This one was planted about 2 weeks later than the first one, so all of these plants are still a lot smaller than the other bed, which actually made it a lot easier to trellis these ones. I didn't have any branches snap off because the plants don't have as many fruit on them, so they didn't snap or break as easily. So these ones were nice and easy to trellis. So this side is mostly cherry tomatoes, but there are a few other varieties. So this is a slicing tomato. I think this is probably Abe Lincoln. And then over here we have some paste tomatoes. These might be Amish paste. I'm assuming that's what these ones are. So these will all be used for sauces this winter, or I guess this fall when I start canning. And then there's some Sungolds here as well. This is just to give you an idea of what the garden looks like. So this bed behind me here had all my potatoes in it, and I harvested these as soon as I got home. I had been dealing with potato beetles all summer. So before I left, I had been coming out every morning and picking potato beetles off of my potatoes, and that actually worked really well at keeping them at bay and keeping my plants nice and healthy. But as you can imagine, after a month of not being here, the potato beetles, their population completely exploded, and they did do some serious damage to my potatoes. Luckily enough though, I still was able to harvest an amazing potato harvest. I will put a photo over here of what my potato harvest looked like. I was very happy with what I ended up getting out of this bed. So this bed is now empty, and I think what I'm gonna do is plant garlic in this bed over the winter. My garlic last winter I planted in this in-ground garden over here where the cattle panel greenhouse is. And that area ended up being very wet and just was not the ideal situation for garlic to grow in. And because my onions did so good in the raised beds, I'm hoping that my garlic will do well as in these raised beds as well. So I'm gonna have this as my garlic bed. And another reason I'm doing that is because I don't want to grow potatoes in this bed again, because this bed is actually completely infested with potato beetles. Like if you just dig around the soil right now, you'll probably find a couple. So much so actually that they're actually moving to the tomato plants, because tomatoes and potatoes are related to one another. Potato beetles will attack your tomatoes as well. So just something to keep in mind. But anyways, because I have this bed that is completely infested with potato beetles, I want to do some crop rotations to make sure that next year I don't have an even bigger infestation in this bed. So the potatoes will be moving to the onion bed, and then the garlic will be moving into this bed. But until that happens, I am going to plant some other things in here just to make sure that the soil isn't being exposed to the elements too much. So I just planted a bunch of cilantro in this bed, and once it cools down in temperature, because it is going up to like 30 degrees Celsius today, and it's going to be in the high 20s and low 30s for the next like 10 days, I am going to wait until it cools down, but then plant some lettuce into these beds so that I have some lettuce going into the fall. But there are still a few things growing in this bed. So because the potatoes did so well so early, a lot of the other things that I planted in here did not thrive, but now they seem to be doing pretty good. So I have some beets, which I have to pull today. And then I have a bunch of carrots here, which I won't pull until the fall when we get our first frost, because frost helps plants convert to sugars, their starches into sugars, which makes them sweeter. So allowing your root vegetables to go through a little bit of frost is really good for getting those really sweet root veggies. And then I have a Brussels sprout here, which doesn't look like it's doing much, to be honest, because it was completely covered with potatoes. But yeah, it's not looking too bad. So then if we move over to this bed, this was originally the strawberry bed. But because I knew that the strawberries weren't going to get super big on the first year, I did plant other things in this bed. So at the front here, I have a bunch of basil, which started going to flower. So I've been just kind of picking the tops off. to prevent them from flowering, because that will change the taste of the basil. It smells so good. And then I do have some more strawberry flowers growing. I'm not sure if these will actually produce fruit because it's been so hot, but there are 3 different varieties of strawberries growing in this bed. And the idea of having 3 different varieties was so that the strawberries produce strawberries all summer. So there's June-bearing and ever-bearing strawberries in this bed. And I was just hoping that that would mean that I would get strawberries from the end of June, early July, until maybe mid-August, but we'll see. As you can see here, these aren't looking so great. This heat really isn't helping these strawberries at all. And some of them, the plants themselves are looking a little crusty. So I'm gonna have to give these, prune these crusty leaves off and make sure that everything's looking good going into the fall. And then here I have another beautiful nasturtium. Look at how beautiful that looks. So this one I think is my favorite. The leaves are just absolutely massive. And this one has 2 different varieties of flowers, or 2 different colors. So there's this very vibrant orange, this neon orange, similar to the last one. But then there's also, let me see if I can find one, this like more muted orange, like here. And the combination of these 2 has just been very, very pretty. And it just looks so nice on the end of that bed there. Then over here I have some parsnips growing. I just harvested one the other day and it was absolutely massive. I'll probably let these go until the fall as well to let them get a little bit sweeter, but I had one last night for dinner and it was delicious. And then just over here I have some carrots growing. Same thing, let them grow into the fall so that they get nice and sweet. And then over here I have some peanuts, which I have never grown before. Not sure if this is looking good or not, but it is flowering, which I'm gonna take as a good sign. So then if we walk over this way, we have another beautiful nasturtium there, another pot full of peanuts, and then this is some ginger, which looks very terrible, so not too hopeful for ginger, and there are some weeds growing. Then in this bed I have a bunch of beets. I just pulled one actually so I can show you what this looks like. So I have a bunch of beets growing here. This one looks really good too. So my plan is to pull all of these today. I also have some onions growing, so those will be pulled today as well. Then over here I have some more carrots, another little nasturtium. And then over here I have some turnips, which I've also never grown before. I just pulled this one so I could check the size of it, and it is massive. Just so you can see the size. There's my head, there's the turnip. Not bad. I feel like, I mean, I've never grown these before, so I'm not sure if this is gonna be too big to actually eat, but I'm gonna give it a go and see. I actually grew these mostly to make stock for soups for this winter, so I'm hoping that I can still use them for that at least. So the raised beds are definitely some of my favorite parts of the garden because everything that I grew in them has done so well, but this is my second favorite part of the garden. So this is one of my squash trellises, and as you can see, they haven't grown completely up and around the trellis yet, but they're getting pretty close and it is looking super lush and green. So I'm very excited to show you what this looks like. So starting off, we have some sunflowers here, which if I get a little bit closer to, they are now officially taller than I am. And they haven't even really started growing their flowers yet, so I'm assuming that these are gonna get quite tall, which is very exciting. I'm hoping that these get to like 8 feet. That would be amazing. But they're looking really good. They definitely add a nice lushness to the garden. Then if I continue down here, oh, there's a little bee pollinating in there. But we have, I think this is a pumpkin, a nice pumpkin growing there. And then because when I planted this garden, or planted this trellis, a lot of my squash died. So I ended up replanting a bunch of stuff. I went to the nurseries and just bought a bunch of random squash and planted a ton of different things. So I don't actually remember what's what, but I think this here is an acorn squash, and it is extremely prolific. You can see that there's a lot of female flowers with baby squash on them. And then if you go down here, there's one acorn squash growing there. And then, I don't know if you can see that there's another one growing right there. So I'm gonna have a ton of acorn squash this year, which is amazing, and I'm definitely not complaining because that is awesome. Coming around the corner here, I have some yellow zucchini, which I need to pick today, and some green zucchini there. I have about 4 more in my house already, so I definitely need to start eating some more zucchini or giving it away. Then if we come around this side, I have some pumpkins. This pumpkin has like doubled in size just from yesterday, which is amazing. And then there's another one down there. I don't know if you can see right there. But I'm not sure what's going on with my pumpkin leaves here. It's definitely not powdery mildew, but maybe it's some type of blight. It seems to get worse where the oldest part of the plant, and then it gets better as the plant continues growing. So I'm not sure if it's gonna have an impact on the plants or not, but it seems to be okay so far. And then same thing down here. I have some melons growing. They are being overshadowed by the squash. So I've been trying to get them to climb up the trellis here just so that they get a little bit more sunlight. And I might actually cut back some of these squash leaves, but this melon has actually gotten maybe double in size in the last like 4 days. So that's pretty good. I'm really hoping to get some melons because they're one of my favorite things to eat in the garden. Then if we continue this way, there's some, I think this is another melon here, just based on how big it is. And there are a couple more melons growing. You can see that there. So I'm really hopeful that we get some melons this year, but I don't know how many we'll get with the fact that these are being so overshadowed. And I've just been trying to encourage these to grow on the trellis by kind of placing them like that. And then over here, this area has not been weeded yet. So this area has some snapdragons, which you can see there and there. And then there's some carrots, which I honestly didn't think would grow very well here because it's an in-ground garden. The ground was super compacted and super wet. So I wasn't very hopeful about the carrots, but they seem to be doing pretty well. I don't know if you can see them, but the tops of them are at least 1 inch, if not more. So that's pretty good, I would say. Since this garden was new to me this year, one of the things I tried doing was planting fruits and veg in different places around the garden to see where they did the best. So just like I mentioned here, these carrots, I didn't think that they would do too well in ground because the soil was super compacted. It was very wet when I planted everything in it in the spring. So I really didn't have high hopes that they would grow very well. So that's why I also planted them in the raised beds, because I wanted to see if they did better in one location over the other. So once I pull these carrots, I'll have a better idea if I can plant carrots in the ground next year. But just as an example, my potatoes, they thrived in the raised beds. They really liked the fact that the soil stayed dry, it dried out easy, the soil was nice and loose and not compacted, so it allowed for these really big potatoes, the biggest potatoes I've ever grown personally. And so they just did really well. Whereas I did plant a few potatoes in the ground, and they actually, I didn't show them to you because they are non-existent. They either died in the ground or something ate them. I'm not quite sure what happened to them, but they just are no longer there. So now I know that potatoes do better in the raised beds and in the grow bags, which I had as well. So I'll be doing that or continuing to grow them there in years to come. So if we go on the other side of this kind of squash bed, I do have some Brussels sprouts growing here. These ones are quite small just because I think that they're being overshadowed by the giant sunflowers here. There's another one back there, which is pretty tiny. Then more squash. And then I have a nice big, two nice big Brussels sprouts here. You can actually see that there's some Brussels sprouts growing, which is very exciting. One thing I've noticed though is that these Brussels sprouts are starting to be attacked by cabbage moth, specifically the caterpillars. So all of these little white dots here are cabbage moth butterfly eggs, which will then hatch, or yeah, I'm gonna say hatch is the right word, and turn into these caterpillars, which I hope you can see there. And these caterpillars then munch on the leaves and create these holes, and they will eventually destroy your plants. Brassicas are notorious for attracting pests. So usually what I do is I grow all of my brassicas under a hoop with a mesh on it, and that prevents the flea beetles from attacking them in the spring and prevents the cabbage moth caterpillars and the cabbage moth butterflies from attacking them in the summer and fall. This year, unfortunately, I just wasn't able to get my hoop out in time because I was creating this garden from scratch in the spring. So instead what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use something called BTK, which is an organic insecticide, and I'm gonna spray the leaves of my Brussels sprouts with this substance. Basically what it is, it's like a poison that you spray on the leaves, and as the caterpillars eat the leaves with the poison on them, it attacks them from the inside out. It's completely organic. It is safe for humans' consumption. Well, you don't really eat the leaves anyways, but it's safe to use on plants that are going to be consumed by humans. And it's just one way of controlling the cabbage moth caterpillars so that you can actually harvest some of your brassicas. This area of the garden was looking so good before I left, but it is now looking a little wonky. So this area was my bean trellis, and this is not a bad problem. It is completely overgrown with beans to the point where my trellis completely fell over. So that's why I have a trellis there and no trellis over here, is because the beans just got so heavy that it actually broke one of the poles and destroyed most of the trellis that was there. So these beans over here are Barlotti beans. They are a drying bean, so I'm just gonna let this whole plant dry out in the fall and then just harvest these pods and then shell the beans out of them, put them into jars, and then use them for soups and stews throughout the winter. It is completely overrun with beans, which is why the trellis broke. And these pods are so beautiful. It's just a little bit of a disaster. And then over here, lots of weeds, but I do have some scarlet runner beans growing. These clearly aren't as prolific as the Barlotti beans over there. You can tell that there's quite a stark difference between that jungly disaster over there and the nice prim and proper scarlet runner beans that are over here that are climbing up nicely and, you know, not completely taking over the trellis. So not as prolific, but very beautiful. And hopefully they'll put some pods on shortly now that they've started to flower. And then over here I have some cosmos. I think these are the seashell variety. They produce these really unique petals that are almost like cup shaped. And they're looking very beautiful. If you are growing cosmos or any other flower like this, if you deadhead the flowers once they're spent, you will get more flowers. So definitely pull off those old and raggedy looking flowers. So this is another area of the garden that's looking a little neglected. On the far side of here, there are some snapdragons growing, but they have been outcompeted by the weeds. So all those yellow flowers are weeds, which I did not plant, nor do I want, but I have to pull those and maybe the snapdragons will grow, but to be honest, I'm not too worried. But then this middle area here has some wheat growing, which I'll show you right now. So this year I planted a bunch of wheat in hopes of making my own bread. So this is all starting to look really good. Basically now all I have to do is wait for this to go to die essentially and dry out, and then I can take out the berries, which are inside of these, and mill them into flour, and hopefully I'll be able to make one loaf of bread. That is my goal. And then over here I have my pepper patch, which is looking way better than it was a month ago. I have, oh, there's some grasshoppers. I have a bunch of peppers over here that are growing. And there's even a bell pepper growing on that one over there. So overall, not too bad. There's lots of flowers, so hopefully we'll get some peppers in the next couple weeks. Peppers really don't like to have their feet wet, and because I have such heavy clay soil, and because we got so much rain in the spring this year, these pepper plants were just soaked the entire time. So they were really yellow, they looked really sad. So the fact that they are now green and producing peppers is a really good sign, and I'm hoping that we'll get an even bigger pepper harvest in the next couple of weeks. And now to show you something that I'm very excited about. I've been trying to grow these for the last 3 to 4 years, and I finally have something to show for it. Take a look. I finally have my very first artichoke. I've been trying to grow these for so long, and this is the year. So I'm gonna harvest this today. I feel like this might already be a little bit too far gone because the petals are starting to open, but I am dying to try it. So I'm gonna harvest this today and give it a try. So one of the things that I did differently this year when growing my artichokes is that I made sure to put them through a cold period before planting them outside. So normally what I do is I start all my artichoke seeds in like January or February. I grow them in my basement under grow lights, and then I transplant them outside when it gets warm enough. But artichokes actually need to go through a cold period in order to form a flower bud. And they need about 10 to 20 hours of cold at 10 degrees Celsius. So I threw all of my artichoke plants into the garage when it was basically still winter, and I left them there for around 2 weeks, and then once that 2 weeks was up, I brought them back inside under my grow lights and then just grew them like I normally would grow any other plant. And that seems to have worked. I don't want to get too cocky in my artichoke growing because I only have one bud so far, but I'm very excited about this, and I'm really hopeful that I'll get a couple more buds this year, considering it's still relatively early, and I got one, so hopefully I'll get a couple more as well. And then I have a sunflower here, and then this is my strawberry patch. I planted about 50 more strawberries in here. This area was completely overrun with weeds. You could barely even see the strawberries, so they're just getting sunlight for the first time in like a month. So I'm hoping that they get a little bit bigger, but considering that they weren't getting any sunlight, they're looking pretty good. And then over here I have 2 haskaps. You can't really see them, but there's 2 haskaps planted here. If you don't know what a haskap is, it looks like a elongated blueberry. I have 2 planted there, and then I have a zinnia patch here. This is the patch I was talking about that wasn't doing too well. You can see that there's 1 or 2 plants that are starting to put on their buds, but I think the soil here is just so compacted that they just weren't able to grow. They stayed very small for most of the summer, and they're just now starting to grow. So yeah, I think it's probably just a soil issue, and I'm assuming that's why these corn are also pretty stunted. They're very small, maybe like 3 feet tall in total, and they should be way taller at this point. And they're actually looking quite yellow, so it could be a nutrient deficiency, it could be a soil issue. I'm not sure what is going on, but they don't look great, unfortunately. But you win some, you lose some. Well, that's my garden tour video for today. I will be posting a video on how to cure your onions and shallots and posting that in the next few days. So if you're interested, please make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. I will see you next time, and have a great week in the garden.